Hi, I'm Gillian. I actually don't know anyone in the room apart from Louise, so pleased to meet you all. Hope you can hear me. I'm also quite short. I'm an ambassador for the Scottish Huntington's Association. I'm also a trustee on the board like Louise, and I go out and I do talks to community groups and groups of healthcare professionals to try and raise awareness of Huntington's. I have the gene for Huntington's disease myself. But today, and this has nothing to do with anything, this injury is not related to Huntington's disease in any way, this was just a freak accident. And today I'm here to talk to you about my involvement in Huntington's research. So this is my lovely mum, Myra, my late mother, and that's her holding me as a baby. Now you will see that I bear an incredible resemblance to a baby Frankenstein. And Frankenstein also was linked to clinical research trials and research and laboratory experiments, so that's a bit of a coincidence. But my lovely mum, Myra, actually was very late in being diagnosed with Huntington's disease. We had no family history of Huntington's disease, so when my mum developed some weird and wonderful symptoms, she had heart disease from the age of 40, so they were putting their symptoms down to complications of cardiac surgery and many strokes. So she was actually very advanced before a neurologist took over her care in 1999 and took her in, tested her for everything, and we were given a big bombshell diagnosis of Huntington's disease. So I was a nurse, and I am a nurse, and my husband-to-be at the time was a doctor, but actually it's so rare, very few people understand Huntington's disease, so I had to look it up in medical books. There was no Google in those days, and I just always remember the words that I read when I found out and looked it up. Relentlessly progressive, incurable, and hereditary. And the hereditary factor is obviously massive because, as Louise said, there's a 50% chance of you developing Huntington's disease from an affected parent. So it was a bit of a bombshell, this, and I obviously wanted to look towards any kind of hope, so I was clutching at straws and I looked to see if there was any research going on that would give me some hope. At the time, any research I looked into was on fruit flies and mice. And while I appreciate that fruit flies and mice were very important in getting us to the HD research place where we are today, at the time I personally didn't find it very inspiring. So I was about to get married a month later, so I just focused on the wedding, and then after the wedding I went on to have 3 beautiful daughters, so I was too busy being a wife and a mum and a nurse, and didn't really look at research again for a while. In 2011, unfortunately, I went through a marriage separation, and I decided at that point that I wanted to have the test myself to find out one way or the other. There is a test that they do that will give you the clinical diagnosis. So I had maybe 12 years of being at risk, where I'd found that I was very anxious, the uncertainty of whether I had Huntington's disease or not was very difficult. So right in the middle of my separation, which is not what they advise, I decided that now was the time to be tested. And I had the test, and I found out that I do have the gene for Huntington's disease, so I will go on to develop it. Now, a lot of people wouldn't handle that very well, and only 10 to 15% of people actually go forward and get the test. But this actually was a positive turning point for me. It was a relief. I felt empowered. I felt driven to go on and live my life to the best that I could. And I started on a bucket list. I then received a very special invitation in October 2016. My best friend's father-in-law, who was a professor down at University College London, invited me along to a talk. He'd been invited to a talk with Professor Sarah Tabrizi, and this was on a big, massive trial that was new for Huntington's disease. So I was very lucky to get to go along to this talk. And for those who don't know of Sarah Tabrizi, she is absolutely amazing. She is a professor of clinical neurology at University College London, and she has dedicated decades of work into research, particularly into Huntington's disease. So I went along to London and I was absolutely blown away. This was a world away from fruit flies and mice. This was a big, massive human trial, very, very innovative drugs that were showing very positive results, and it was looking like this could change the course of the disease. So I was absolutely blown away by this. But even on top of that, I actually got the the opportunity to have a good long chat with Professor Tabrizi at the end of the talk. And actually, she asked me about my daughters and how they were handling it. And I had to admit that I hadn't told my girls. And she told me about all the research that had been done into telling people younger, children are more resilient. So she gave me some advice about talking to the girls when I went back home. And I had always thought that research into Huntington's disease was just for people who were symptomatic to trial drugs. But she made me aware of Enroll HD, which is an information gathering trial, and told me that, I could become part of research now. So I was given lots of leads and things, and I came back from London completely inspired. So I came home, and that's me and my girls, and it was very difficult sitting down to talk to my girls, but they were absolutely amazing, very strong, very resilient, and they are my biggest cheerleaders, and they stand by my side in every single thing that I do. I then went on to contact Dr. Ritchie, who's the lead research consultant in Glasgow, and before I knew it, I was signed up for my first trial, which is Enroll HD. Now, Enroll HD, as Louise, as you both spoke about, is a global information trial. But actually, they sort of look into cognition, behaviour, motor skills, movement, and it's, you're in there for a good hour and a half. It's very thorough, very specific tests. All I was thinking at the time was, I'm going along to meet a team of people who I've never met before. I'm going to try and impress them. I'm going to wear my skinny jeans and my new high-heeled boots. I realised as soon as I started the trial that actually this was a complete wardrobe malfunction, because you're asked to walk heel to toe in a straight line up a corridor, and you have to stand, and they're trying to pull you back to see how quickly you lose your balance, and you've got to stand up, sit down, walk here, do this. Anyway, it's been flatties all the way, and I never went back to wearing my heeled boots. It's also quite daunting. It's annual visits, and it's very specific tests, and I know that the first few visits I've had, I've come out there knowing that I have performed very well, that the cognitive tests have been great, that I've managed to do all the motor skills things, my movement's been fine. But every year you go along, there's that apprehension, am I going to notice a change? Am I going to notice a decline? Am I going to be doing something less well than I did before? So just putting it out there, that's one of the things that I have noticed. And because of the pandemic, it's actually going to be, I'm waiting for a date for my next Enroll HD visit, and it will be probably 3 years, which is quite a big gap. And so I'm very aware that there might be some changes, although I'm feeling very healthy and I'm still asymptomatic, I'm very happy to say. So fingers crossed. HD Clarity, I was invited along to join in that, and as they said, that is cerebrospinal fluid samples, so I had a lumbar puncture, but unfortunately it took 5 attempts the first time, and several changes of position to get the sample. And while I was recovering from that, Dr. Ritchie came and chatted to me, and he said, do you think you would fancy coming along again? Is there any way you'd consider coming along in 4 weeks' time and having a repeat sample taken? And I said, well, considering it took 5 attempts, you're going to have to sell this one to me. But when he explained that to have a repeat sample, to be able to see if it remains, the biomarkers and the protein levels remain stable, and then when they're trying to prove that drugs are working and it's the drugs that are having an effect on the biomarkers and the protein levels, I said, that's it, fine, I'm sold, I'll see you in 4 weeks' time. So staying positive, obviously I do a lot of things to try and stay positive. I do have a very and this was nothing to do with my bucket list, but I do have a bucket list. So I've done lots of things like skydives and wing walks with loop-the-loops and all sorts of stuff. But actually, being involved in research is a huge part in how I stay positive. Maybe it's different for me because I'm not trialling drugs. I don't have the worry about side effects because it's just my time, I guess, and my cerebrospinal fluid and 5 attempts at lumbar punctures. But yeah, it's all been completely positive for me. Instead of sitting back and waiting for it to happen, I'm doing something productive. I'm helping scientists to understand the disease better, which is then going to help them improve services. And obviously we're looking to them to find treatments and maybe even a cure, which is what we all hope and pray for. I've met some wonderful people during my research journey, and the HD community is very strong and resilient, and I love being a big part of that. But the main thing is that it gives me hope. Even if they don't find a treatment or a cure in my time, it gives me hope for my girls, it gives me hope for future generations. And I would say that it's just been completely positive for me. One of my favourite quotes is Lewis Carroll. In the end, we only regret the chances that we didn't take. So if anyone is thinking about becoming a part of research, I would say go for it. You might end up being a part of something very amazing. You might end up being part of medical history. And I feel very lucky, as you do, Abhishek, to be healthy today. And thank you very much for listening.